help us understand the shooting video and to give us some insight is law enforcement expert and a former police chief, Dr. G.M. Cox. He is currently the director of the Public Administration Program at Tarleton State University School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies. Dr. Cox, thanks for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
Our first question, jumping right into it, what were your thoughts when you saw this video?
Well, I have some concerns on the video, but obviously there's some angles that are not accounted for. Before I jump to conclusion, I'd like to see those angles. The one I've seen has been almost a takeaway, and one had actually a black spot over what might be where the action is, if you were. And so, but there's some troubling things in the video.
Well, I know there's some troubling things and there's gaps in the video, but just in your professional opinion, from what you've seen, do you feel they acted appropriately in that video?
The problem we've got with when you look at a use of force by an officer is it's judged from two different versions. One, is it right?
Yeah.
So we all look at that from is it a right thing to do? Then you have the legal standard, which is a justified. And sometimes officers look at an incident like this and they define it from a justified.
Yeah.
We define it from is it right?
Yeah.
So what we have to look at, it doesn't look right. There are all kinds of things wrong with what it appears. There's a couple of Supreme Court cases. One is Garner versus Tennessee, which talks about seizing someone. And when you shoot them, you're seizing them. And it talks you can't use deadly force on an individual who does not pose an immediate threat with a weapon of some kind or about to do a heinous crime. But we can't forget the second one. It's called Graham versus Connor. And it basically said, the Supreme Court said, you can't really just view an officer's actions in the cool of day with all the lights. You have to ask what was the officer experiencing at the time. So when you balance those two, now we start looking at justification.
Right.
But at this time, you're looking at, I can't see what his right hand's doing. It appears to me that you got two officers, and they look to be pretty good size officers. They should be able to control the suspect.
Right.
But we don't have a clue what that right hand was doing. And if, you know, this is not the Wild Wild West. It's not who pulls the gun first wins. In this case, if he has his hand on that weapon, and they can't control that. On the other hand, I'm not sure that's the case. It causes me some issues, what I'm seeing.
Well, for example, online today, there were people showing videos of officers engaged with other people.
Right.
And you know, this guy's fighting the police.
Yes.
He's dueling with the police. And they didn't shoot him.
Right.
So the question becomes, at what point do we decide to use lethal force? Because it's obvious nobody wants to use lethal force in a situation where you can restrain somebody. So at what point do you decide to use lethal force, and why in certain cases do you use it, in certain cases you don't?
That's a great question, and unless you've ever been there, it's a very difficult question to answer. So one is we try to train officers on mental triggers. In other words, we see a gun.
Right.
See a knife. Okay, so you know immediately there's a threat, it could cause you death, serious injury, or somebody else. So that's one. Number two is then the officer has to justify in his or her mind what he or she's about to do. And that's split second.
Yeah.
We've put some citizens through don't shoot situations, and many of them shoot unarmed citizens immediately.
Right.
So it's not easy. But the point is, they're trained professionals. They're supposed to know what to do. We train them to respond to these kinds of situations, and we do so in seconds, milliseconds, really. So the officer decides based on what they see, what they're experiencing, and here's the problem. It's right here.
And it's not easy.
It's absolutely not.
It's right
Cox.
here. We're looking at it from out here.
All right, we'll be
thanks for
discussing
joining
this
us,
more this
Dr.
morning.
Cox.
Thank you.